in our society, and this is really racism made structural and institutional and policy, vested in policy. It's based on this attitude that race mixing was not only detrimental and dangerous, but would devalue or degrade something. And so that's really been baked into our society and our culture.
This was in the 30s?
This map was created in the 30s. The government commissioned these maps, and there's 239 places in the country, urban areas mostly, where these maps were created.
So my name is Braden Crooks, and I'm the co-founder of Designing the We, along with April D. Simone, and we created the Undesign the Redlining exhibit that's here behind me. This exhibit explores the history of policies like redlining, urban renewal, all the way through things like mass incarceration, and really asks the question, how does structural racism and inequality really get designed into cities and places, starting with the massive amount of disinvestment in communities of color that we see starting with redlining. So redlining begins in the 1930s, but really takes decades to fully unfold. And what happens is we begin to concentrate folks into certain neighborhoods at the same time that we're disinvesting in them. And other folks, right, are going to get access to home ownership and wealth building, and it's going to create a huge racial divide in our nation.
I want to give a shout out to Jacqueline Wagner and to the Enterprise team for moving this important exhibit forward. It's an opportunity for us to learn yet again from our history with an intent to make life much better. This is an opportunity to reimagine, to essentially reinvest and to recommit to the very proposition of what democracy is about. And so when we think about the history of redlining and predatory lending and all of the unfair practices that put a ceiling on the opportunity for ordinary people just to live lives of decency and dignity, it is an opportunity for us then to teach future generations and current practitioners as to what we can do, and what lies ahead is nothing but opportunity for us to make life better for those in this community and beyond.
History can be a great teacher. We can take these stories from past to present and make our dreams come true. And I don't have all the answers. When I fall, I get back up and I run faster. So in the words of our hero Black Panther, the wise build bridges, but fools build barriers.
My biggest takeaway is that none of the conditions that people face today are a mistake. None of it is an accident. And I think that that tends to be the narrative, especially when it comes to our homeless folks, when it comes to our folks suffering from addiction, our folks suffering from poverty. A lot of times we want to put the onus on them. And this was just such a strong reminder that this goes back centuries, decades of disinvestment, of racialized policy, and just ill will against the other, and the sort of white supremacy of, white folks kind of being the best. It's been a long time in the making, the conditions that we're facing today. So that's what I'm taking away from this. None of it is an accident, but at the same time, all of it can change if we come together.
So it really has impact on our housing. I've seen the capital flight, the white flight that defined the quality of our communities, what it meant for my lived experience in terms of the rising renter class, the vacant and distressed housing, and in New York City, the quality of schools, the economic opportunities. When capital leaves, when the businesses leave, so do the job opportunities and the opportunities to actually lift ourselves up by our bootstraps, and so the work that I had when I was growing up was cleaning houses. My brother was pumping gas. We sold Jet magazines. We did whatever it took as opposed to being able to work in the formal economy. And then we've seen, of course, that this foundation was the foundation for gentrification. And now today, Bedford-Stuyvesant, it's more expensive to rent a house in Bed-Stuy than it is in Manhattan, right? absolutely amazing in terms of what is going on to the economy of these communities. And this is not different from your lived experiences and what's happened here and what is happening here in Los Angeles.
To target a particular community and use a red line to do so, and have that targeting be based on the race of the people who live in that community, particularly black folks when it started, and to then deny services or disadvantage through policies and systems and structures the people who live in that community. So it's racially based, and it disadvantages the people who live inside the red line in a way that makes goods, services, products, opportunities less available to them. So we kind of use it as a catchphrase now, and to keep in mind this question of race and place and power as being really tied into what redlining is. But in its original form, original creation, the term was pretty specific, and it referred to the practice of assessing risk. And it wasn't banks that were doing those assessments at first. It literally was our federal government. Our federal government utilized a policy of looking at the geography across the country and assessing the risk of making investments, financial investments, into those places based on the race of the people who live there, with the intention of not making investments in areas that were deemed risky almost solely because black people live there. That was how risk was defined.
Wanted to share the importance of bringing the Undesign, the Redline exhibit to Los Angeles because it gives us the history of redlining starting from the 1930s to where we are today. I think a lot of people look around our great city and say, what happened? Where did all the homeless people come from? Why are we hearing about gentrification and displacement? And why is it happening now? And I want to share the importance of an exhibit like this that shows that it's actually been decades in the making, and there were policies and practices that actually created the challenges that we're facing today. And it's my hope that people use this exhibit to educate themselves about the history and to help guide us how we think looking forward.
So you just got a tour of the Undesign, the Redline exhibit. What's your biggest takeaway?
Just the fact that there's just so much history that we're not really aware of around the practices and policies that have gone into place to make things the way they are, to keep us segregated, and especially if you think about the new wave of gentrification that's happening and displacement. It's really interesting to help people to know that this has been happening for decades, and even how it starts historically, like with slavery and manifest destiny and things like that, and just how it all connects, and the past is still informing the present.
And how will this inform your work at Community Coalition?
I think it just underscores that the work we're doing in South LA is just that much more important to keep black and brown communities in South LA as communities like ours are being developed. And so when we think about how do we create economic development within the community without displacing folks, I think this just kind of underscores why doing that right and strategically and intentionally is so important, because one can beget the other if not done properly.